This is about my latest book, which is called Nehru and Bose Parallel Lives, which Viking published in October 2014. The main purpose of this book was to explore a relationship between two iconic figures of the Indian national movement, Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose. From what I had read before I began researching this book, it had seemed to me that there was a period in the 1930s when Bose and Nehru were ideologically very close within the Congress, both kind of reflecting or representing what was a left opinion within the Congress. Both were pro-socialism, pro-communism, sympathetic to communism, certainly pro-socialism, and were among the two leaders of the Congress who had an exposure to what was happening in Europe and in the rest of the world, and was trying to relate the Indian national movement to these trends of history. So I thought this was a relationship that was worth exploring, and also the literature was telling me in the 1940s this relationship had completely ruptured. Nehru and Bose were on opposite sides, as it were, both very critical of each other. So I wanted to see what had happened. What was this relationship only some kind of an ideological bonding, or was there more to it, and why did it rupture? So this is why I started researching this book and thinking about writing on it. And it turned out, the research at least for me produced some surprises. It turned out that it was more than just an ideological bonding. From around 1931-32 to, I would say, 1938-39, it was more than just a relationship. In fact, it was a very, very close friendship. There were some political differences, but certainly this was a very, very close political friendship, to the extent that when Kamala Nehru was dying, the only person who was with the Nehru family was Subhash Bose, and he helped Nehru to make the funeral arrangements of Kamala Nehru. It was that close. And Nehru in fact described Subhash Bose to be like his younger brother. And then, once the Second World War broke, this friendship completely broke, because Subhash, as we know, went over to the Allied Axis side to seek the help first of Germany and then of Japan to help the cause of India's freedom. And Nehru was completely opposed to fascism. So what had been an ideological camaraderie and a friendship in the 1930s became in the 1940s a complete ideological opposition. At least from Nehru's side, there was ideological hostility. On Subhash's side, he recognized the hostility of Jawaharlal Nehru to fascism, but this did not stop him from naming one of the brigades of the Indian National Army, the Nehru Brigade. So there was in Subhash's part a certain acknowledgement of the past friendship and the past ideological bonding that had existed in the 1930s. Then of course there's a post-mortem resurrection of the friendship, because when the news comes that in 1945 Subhash Bose possibly died in that famous air crash in Taipei, Nehru actually took that news extremely hard. One eyewitness account said that he wept. So, and then in the years subsequent to Bose's death, when Nehru came to meet some of the members of the Indian National Army who were prisoners, and he actually was going to, he represented them legally and therefore came to interview them. He said that now I have realized that Netaji was actually behaved like a hero in Southeast Asia, and he stood up to the bullying of the Japanese generals, he stood by his soldiers, and he went to the extent of saying, who knows, put in his shoes, I would probably have behaved exactly the same way. So there was a post-death patching up of the friendship, and Nehru again recognized Subhash to be an ideological comrade and like a personal younger brother. So it is this relationship that I trace and try to analyze why it ruptured, why it was formed in the first instance, why it ruptured, and what brought them together again at the end, even though Subhash was not actually physically there to enjoy the fruits of that friendship. This is what the book is about. And as in so many instances of the Indian national movement, there is a third, somewhat shadowy figure to this relationship. That is Gandhi, who is not a part of the friendship, but he's very definitely a very influential figure in the way the friendship unravels, it develops, and finally collapses. So Gandhi is very much present as the third figure in the book. In fact, working to see to it that these two individuals remain parallel, lines that never meet. Well, I'll first begin by slightly qualifying one of the words that you used in your question. These sources are only theoretically available to countless people, because most people across the world, and particularly so in India, who talk about history, who claim to know about history, have never been inside an archive. So they do not even know what these sources are. They have some vague ideas, some of them absolutely nonsensical, but yet they hold forth on history. History is one of those subjects where everybody seems to have a claim to talk about, and nobody actually realizes that history is a specialized discipline which requires a certain kind of academic training. And this brings me to the substantive part of your question. So you train yourself to be a historian in the sense that you learn how to question sources, how to relate one source to another, how to put a source in a context, how to understand an event in relationship to other events, how to sift evidence, how to determine what is important and what is not so important. So all these are parts of a particular kind of academic training which doesn't come to everybody naturally. One of the greatest historians of the 20th century, Mark Bloch, called the historian's discipline a craft. He said the historian is like a craftsman. He actually learns the trade. He learns how to do it, just like a tailor or a cobbler or somebody like that. It learns his craft, how to do it, as a novice sitting before a master craftsman, at the feet of the master craftsman. Similarly, a historian learns his craft. He trains himself. He's taught by his teachers, and he trains himself in certain ways of looking at the past, and looking at the past through certain types of sources and historical material, and then trying to piece them together, and all the time being aware that this is only a version of the past, not a closure, but another opening, another retrieval of the past. The archive I had access to was, first of all, Nehru's papers, Bose's papers. These are two of the primary sources that I used naturally, because I was writing about these two individuals. And also a large part of what these two individuals wrote are actually now available in print, in the complete works of Subhash Chandra Bose, in the selected works of Jawaharlal Nehru. And there are also the AICC papers. the papers of the All India Congress Committee, where all the Congress proceedings pertaining to this period, 1930s, early 1940s, are recorded. So these are mines of information. And of course also the collected works of Gandhi. There are more than 100 volumes. So this is also a very, very important source for the reconstruction of this entire period, and particularly for the lives of these two people and the relationship that they formed. So I would say three very different types of sources: the writings of Bose, the writings of Nehru, and the writings of Gandhi, plus the AICC papers. Yes, I think all historians come from a particular perspective, and this is why I am somewhat, I don't want to exaggerate the point, but I'm somewhat against this obsession that some people think historians should have, obsession with objectivity. I believe that total objectivity towards history is not possible, because all of us come to look at the past from a certain perspective, from a certain viewpoint, as well as certain prejudices, and we should be open in acknowledging what our own prejudices, what our own approaches are, so that the reader knows exactly where I'm coming from. And there's a question of historiography, of course. So what are the influences that are working on the historian? Who does he think are his peers? But I think historians need to be transparent about these things. We cannot be totally objective, but we can be transparent about what our perspectives and our prejudices and our biases are. The entire Congress, not just those who were left within the Congress, the entire Congress was against the Hindu nationalist movement that was emerging from the 1920s, 1930s, completely against, because the Congress did not believe, and I hope it still does not believe, that it represents only one section or one sect of the Indian population. The Congress was conceived by men like Gandhi, Nehru, and Subhash Bose as a kind of an umbrella organization under which Indians, irrespective of class, caste, and religious creed, were called to fight and the British and join the Indian national movement and make the Indian nation. The difference was in what kind of future India would have as an independent country, and they believed that mere political independence was not enough or adequate. There had to be a very strong economic content to that idea of independence, and a thrust towards equality, a thrust towards better allocation and distribution of economic resources had to be part of the new India that would emerge out of the Indian national movement. And they believed that one way of doing this was to follow the Soviet model of planning in the allocation of economic resources. And this is where they advocated socialism.